Rod Steiger recounts his method acting beginnings with Elia Kazan and being in the film On the Waterfront, where people got to know him first playing Marlon Brando's brother. And he speaks at length about his relationship, or lack thereof, with Brando. And then he talks about being in Humphrey Bogart's last film and admiration for the man who was so pained with cancer, but doing his job. And he also speaks about his breakout leading role in the film The Pawnbroker. This interview hints upon what comes the next night. It talks about the triumphs of this man's life. And the next night it'll focus on the struggles.
Thanks for staying up later. The actor Rod Steiger is with us tonight, and you know him from On the Waterfront and The Pawnbroker, and in the heat of the night, from time to time, he's played Pope John the 23rd, he's played Pontius Pilate, he's played Al Capone, W.C. Fields, Rudolph Hess. We'll start with On the Waterfront, because would you say it's fair to say that that's when people first got a fix on Rod Steiger,
that was
the
the
actor?
thing that gave me my big break in films. Yeah, I was well. What got me into that was I did Marty in this building up in 8H here in NBC, and I don't know what happened. Maybe Marty had the quality of this butcher from the Bronx who was lonely, and what happened was it seemed to touch the loneliness in the people across the country. And over the weekend became a big thing. Elia Kazan, who directed Waterfront, said, "What the hell did you do on Sunday?" I said, "I don't know. We did this show," and everybody, I came out Monday morning, people were saying, "Good morning, Marty." The garbage man was saying, "How you doing, Marty?" And he said, "Well, then go read with Bud Schulberg, who wrote Waterfront, and if he likes you, read the taxi scene." That was funny. "And if he likes you, you can play Marlon Brando's brother." Well, I almost dropped dead because Brando had just done Streetcar, and he was the new god in the American theater. And I went up and I read with Mr. Schulberg, which was a little difficult because he stutters. But anyway, I got the job, and that was my big break.
What were your observations about Brando as a man and as a person to work with?
Well, number one, there was a bit of a haze because of the mystique about him. You know, even at that time, he has one of the most charismatic personalities I've ever known. He was more or less of a loner. You didn't get to talk to him very much. I mean, he talked to Kazan and things like that. I have always felt this man had some kind of a pain in him. And this pain gave him a certain presence that you watched and tried to figure out unconsciously. I don't know why. I still feel to this day. Now, I mean, today, I'm not a great believer in organized religion and deities, but I even say sometimes a prayer when I think of him. A man who has tried all of his life not to get involved with the society in which he exists and to live his own way, and then a murder charge for his son and his daughter facing mental problems and the accidents that ripped her face to shreds and things like that. It's like nature, which I believe gives a comeuppance. If it gives you a great talent, says, "You're doing fine, kid, you're doing great, kid, now just wait a minute," all of a sudden said, "Here's the bill. Your daughter's ill and your son's up on a murder charge." So I have great sympathy for him. I didn't get to know him too well, you know that, but probably the greatest greatest presence on the screen in the last 60 years of American film, and a phenomenal talent.
How many takes did the cab scene require, where he says to you, "Hey, you told me we're going for the money on Wilson tonight." He winds up, he gets the big fight for the title in the ballpark, and I'm just a bum, and I could have been a contender. One of the most famous scenes ever. How many takes?
Well, it took a long time. First of all, the first thing that happened, we came in the morning, and the studio was like a cheese box, a small, remember those old Kraft cheese boxes? Mm-hmm. And if you put your hands out through the windows of the taxi, you could hit the walls almost. And it wasn't much longer. And Kazan was having a furious argument with Sam Spiegel, who produced the picture. And he was screaming, "You son of a gun, you this, you that, you that. You told me I'd have a backdrop." He meant when he shot from the front of the cab, you could see through the back window of the cab. He was supposed to have a backdrop of a photographic backdrop, so it looked like you were on the street, and it wasn't there. He says, "How can I shoot this scene?" And Spiegel said, "But Gerd, you have to understand, darling, we're doing," "Never mind that," he says. And the guy said to him, one of the grips. I came in a cab this morning, Mr. Kazan, and it had a Venetian blind in it. He said, get me the Venetian blind. And they finally, now an hour or two had passed, they did the Venetian blind. And what happened, I think, was they still had no way to shoot out the sides. In other words, you couldn't do a shot from an angle. You'd see the studio wall out the window of the cab about 1.5 feet away. So it forced the director to go in and, I guess, just cross his legs, his heart, and his brain and say, please, actors, please. You know, he had to go in on the actors. And I think that kind of tension, that added, gave a theatrical tension to the scene. It added something. But it took us about 11 hours.
I heard that he left after the 2 shots and his close-ups were done. He left so that when you had to do close-ups in scenes where you were supposedly addressing him, you're just doing it to somebody reading off a script.
That's true. I think he left because he had to go see a doctor or something. At least that's what I read in Kazan's book years later. Yeah.
Did you resent that?
At that time, I was very young. I was very hurt because he was like one of our leaders to me, you know. What the hell can I say? We came out even, right? The scene played very well. I don't think it was a deliberate thing. I don't think, obviously, if he went to see a doctor, he was not in very good shape, so I can't condemn him.
I guess some of us are either unsophisticated or just overly romantic in our view of these things, but we'd like to believe that when something is that emotionally charged, when the on-camera relationship between the two in that movie ends with him literally pulling you off a hook, you've been murdered, and he pulls his older brother off a hook, and even though he feels like you've sold him down the river, there's this bond of blood between the two of you, and he holds you, and his body is racked by the emotion of this moment. You have to believe that some kind of bond happened between the actors who created that.
There was
on
a
camera.
definite bond. I think there was a definite bond. The bond was kind of our respect grew. Our respect grew for each other from the ability to do some kind of acting. Now, there's another side to this thing about Mr. Brando too. When I was hanging on the hook, it was a problem because we were in. It was about, I don't know, very early in the morning, 1 or 2 in the morning in Hoboken, in the middle of the winter. And what happened was when you hung me on the hook, Marlon did his reaction, which took quite a long time, and I couldn't, you could see my breath coming out of the supposed cough. I couldn't hold my breath long enough. And I remember, and I'll always be indebted to him, I was standing there, was getting a bit embarrassed, and he came over to me and he said, listen, if you hyperventilate, if you keep, he said, go like that, then try it and see what happens. So I did that, and he took me, and just in time as my back, you couldn't see my face because I was over his shoulder, then I took another quick breath. So he may go to the doctor in one scene, but he kind of saved my rear end in the other scene, you know.
The Oscar for In the Heat of the Night. You think that was your best performance, as the Oscar indicates, or just a matter of circumstance that you got it on that particular occasion?
Well, there's a couple of things about that. There's a lesson in ego, right? I did The Pawnbroker, and I was nominated, and I went to the big occasion, the great celebration, and I'm sitting there, and I'm saying, well, what the hell, there hasn't a picture this year that's touched The Pawnbroker. I'm saying to myself. So I'm starting to fantasize. Now, I don't know if I should sweep down to the stage. I don't know if I should button my jacket and walk very nonchalantly down. I don't know if I should kiss a few women on the way. I don't know. Maybe I should jauntily go up the steps, maybe slowly go up the steps. And they said, and the winner is, and I'm buttoning my jacket now, right? I'm ready. And they said, Lee Marvin for Cat Ballou. Well, I learned a lesson. I learned a lesson how narcissistic I am and how ridiculous. And then the year later came In the Heat of the Night. And I must confess, I guess I'm just an egomaniac. I read the script and I said to somebody, I said, you know something? I got a good chance to get another award because this time I'm a nice guy. See, most of the time I'm doing the big knife, I was doing villains. The thing that I don't like about my career was I did Marty, who was one of the nicest, tenderest, lonely people in the world. And I was good at playing the average man of the street, right? So good that it convinced you believed him, I hope. And then I got Judd in Oklahoma, thank God, but I didn't realize it's the classic villain. In Hollywood, you know, they have a very narrow view of things. I was then a villain. I never got a chance to do another thing like a Marty or a nice guy, except in things like The Heat of the Night, you know. So I got it for half and half.
Since you mentioned The Pawnbroker, Sidney Lumet's done a lot of good work, Serpico and 12 Angry Men and Network and whatever else. But for my money, The Pawnbroker is his top film. This is an unbelievably great movie.
Well, this man, it's a sad thing. Sidney Lumet and our relationship kind of split up. And I was kind of his boy because I used to do You Are There, right? Walter Cronkite, April 14th, 1867, and You Are There. And I played Andrei Vyshinsky, and I played Rudolf Hess, and I played Rasputin. I played Richard Burbage, the first performance of Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare.
A quick shorthand here for people that don't recall. These were television dramas, dramatizations of historical events.
Right. And I was kind of his boy, and when The Pawnbroker came up, I think partially because of his insistence, I got to do it. I remember the first rehearsal, I walked in, and The Pawnbroker, I don't know what he was, 60 or how many years old, I walked in, and I remember the other actors kind of, I could see the other actors say, wait a minute, I mean, he may like this kid, but come on, you know. Anyway, it came out well. And then what happened, because he's one of the best directors I ever worked for as far as acting is concerned, because he knows his acting. He was a child actor himself. What happened was a very personal thing. I'll try to make it very short. There was a picture he wanted me for, supposed to be with Brando, didn't turn out with Brando. Was going to do it with somebody else, not he, but somebody offered me a salary. I thought that was an insult. My ego got in the way again. I said I wouldn't do it, and I think I hurt Sidney, and Sidney never forgave me. And now what happens is I get an invitation to go to a party at an apartment on 90th Street where my wife and her new boyfriend are having a party. It just happens to be where I used to live. That affects you a little bit. It shakes you up a little. Now, those were the days in analysis when they said, you got to be a good guy, you got to forgive, people are human, you got to be an adult. So I take this jackass of myself as the adult to this party. Meanwhile, I'm upset I didn't get to do the thing, the picture, it never came about anyway. I'm going up the elevator saying, this is incredible. I do not believe I'm doing this. I'll kill this woman if I see her, right? I don't believe it. I press the door button. Who opens the door but Sidney Lumet? And I say, I hope you're happy with your cheap actors. Well, that wasn't a foot in the mouth. That was an entire body. You understand? And it had nothing to do with Sidney, and I've never brought this out in public before, but and since then I have bumped into him in restaurants. I have written him things. I have called him on the phone. But Sidney's got a little bit of an ego, too. And I'm sure he must be thinking, well, you know, I helped him get to do The Pawnbroker, and this is the thanks I get for it. So that's the sad part of that story, because I've never worked with him again, you know.
No matter where the relationship stands now, what stands on film is what you did together in The Pawnbroker. And here's this Jewish guy who had been in a concentration camp. Now he literally is a pawnbroker in Harlem. And his view of everything that happens to him is through the prism of this life-affecting experience, and everything is in flashbacks, and he sees one thing in front of him in the present, and it causes him to fixate on something that it triggers in his past in the concentration camp. And this is such a terrible experience for him that as much as possible he tries to just lock himself off and keep himself away from any kind of human contact, because it always triggers this pain.
Well, his problem was, I don't know, he tried to exist in a society without getting involved in any way. And my attitude has been, still to this day, as long as you breathe in our given society, then you have a responsibility to that given society that you exist in. And it was only near the end that he couldn't feel, and he got so guilty about it. In the scene, there was a scene where he puts his hand through a spike where you put bills on. It was one of the highest forms of flagellation I've ever seen, and he forces his hand down on the spike because something in his body is saying, for Christ's sakes, feel, you're human, what's wrong with you?
You were in Bogart's last movie with him, also a film written by Bud Schulberg, The Harder They Fall,
yeah,
which was about the corruption in boxing.
Yeah, well, it was supposed to be, nobody would talk about it. It was about the corruption of boxing, but it was also supposed to be, supposedly in quotation marks, the true story of the career of Primo Carnero, who was this giant of a man about 90 feet high who couldn't really fight. And then according to the picture, they set up fights, so he became the champion in the underworld, made a fortune. And Mr. Bogart was one of the most professional people I ever worked with, and we used to make jokes, and I remember one day somebody tipped me off. He said, you know what Bogey's going to do today, Rod? I said, what? He's got one of these newspapers where you can put the headline in, right? And the headline was Steiger leaves town, Brando's back, right? That's his headline. I ran out and got one, and I put it underneath my sleeve of my coat, and he came in bouncing in the dressing room, his eyes flashing, you know, he figured he had me, and he says, I got something. And as he pulled his newspaper out, I pulled mine out, and his says, Steiger leaves town, Brando back, and I had Bogey goes to Brando for acting lessons. And he was a wonderful person, and I remember one day he came in, and I was shooting, and he wasn't on schedule that day, so I said to him, what are you doing here? He said, I'm going to shoot close-ups. I got to redo them. I said, what are you talking about? He said, my eyes are watery. I said, his eyes are watery. I figured, all right, I was busy with my life. 2 months later, when he was, 2 months later when he was dead, when somebody said, you know who died today? I said, no. They said, Bogart. I heard my eyes are watery, and I said, you stupid, insensitive idiot. This man was in pain. His eyes were watery. While I was doing the picture, he was in pain. He died of cancer, and he never, ever asked for pity or extra time or anything. You know, I mean, he was incredible. He was wonderful. He on the hour at 9 o'clock in the morning, he was there, and at 6 o'clock, if you tried to get him 1 minute after 6, it's 6 o'clock, you know what I mean? Bye. But that's why his eyes were watery. The man was in pain. He was dying of cancer.
That's big talk coming from you, Eddie, or nobody, because that's what you are.
As you saw it, what was the key to his dynamism on screen, his success as an actor?
He had a sense of confidence and the sense of authority. You know, he could deliver a line like, I don't like ketchup on the horseradish with the gingerbread anyway. And then you would accept it until about a scene later you said, well, I don't like what is this on the horseradish with the ginger snap? He had great authority. He had a sensitive masculinity. And he had a sadness or a compassion about life that was, it's like Spencer Tracy. Tracy had inside of him, there seemed to be this joke going on, kind of saying in his eyes, he was laughing as if to say, I don't believe where I've got, I don't believe what I'm doing. And there was kind of a sadness about him too, you know. But authority was the big thing with Bogey.
In one form or another then, since you mentioned Brando's pain, and you just alluded to what you found in Spencer Tracy and in Bogart, does any effective actor have to draw, at least in part, on some kind of well of actual personal pain, misgiving,
That's what it all
conflict?
depends upon. It depends upon your personal joy and your personal pain. There was a time in acting where the actor did what they thought the character would do in the fictitious circumstances. Then there came the new actors, which started with Montgomery Clift, who did what it would be for them to be in that fictitious circumstances, not trying to make it up with their imagination. What does it mean if somebody says your mother's dead? What does it mean if somebody tells you somebody's cured of a disease? We want to see your reaction. Why? It was based upon this belief that you're an individual, I'm an individual. I may be more talented or less talented than you, or vice versa. But there's only one you, like what they call the voice of the poet in poetry. And if you can get your voice, I don't mean speaking voice, I mean the voice of your soul, the voice of your pain, the voice of your past. If you can get that and bring it into this situation, it will be individual and unique. Now, as I said before, some people may be more exciting than you or less exciting, but there will not be another one of you. The greatest compliment I get is when I'm on an elevator or I ride the subways in New York, which I used to, and somebody be looking at me and say to somebody next to him, and the other one would go like that. And when I started to talk to who was ever with me, they recognized my voice. So that told me I was close to myself in my acting. You understand? I was using my voice. That's one of the greatest compliments when somebody says, you have a peculiar kind of sound in your voice. You come from the United States. Being you are the most important thing you got. Never mind acting, all that crappy profession. You are the best thing you got. And the worst thing you got. And you've got to learn to work with it and wrap it in cotton some days and put it out in the rain other days. You know, I'm very strong on that. I don't like to see people look down on themselves. It's a miracle, this thing called man. It is. I know it sounds trite, but to me it is anyway.
More with Rod Steiger on the craft of acting. If you're with us tomorrow night, good incentive to stay up later. And until then, see you later.
Thanks for watching Cleveland Live Music. It's awfully bright out here. I'd click on another one of my videos. Quit looking into the sun. Your mother told you not to do that. Please hit the subscribe button. And if you want to support the channel more, there's GoFundMe and Patreon information in the video descriptions. Ooh, ooh!